I'm happy to be in this panel. We are 3 women. And 1 man. Oh, we are 4 women actually. And 1 man. We are well represented in the panel.
He's a brave man.
Yes. And yes, we are techie women. PhD computer science, data science, and you did that fancy thing. Actuarial science, computer science, computer science. Very capable women, an engineer. So just putting it out there. Just putting it out there. So there are some capable women in the room, and all of these women here. Anyway, my name is Shikonditao. I have already said my background. I'm a computer scientist. I work for the African Development Bank. I'm in this panel because I'm very passionate about connectivity in Africa. Urban and rural, and when I mean Africa, I mean the whole of Africa. My work actually entails covering the whole of Africa, and we want to bring impact. And we always give an example, if you're in Johannesburg, or if you're in Nairobi, or if you're in Accra to some degree, you pretty much experience the same exposure and lifestyle that you could get anywhere else in the world, same content. If you speak some English, you'll be able to read the same content somebody in San Francisco is doing it. But if you go a kilometer or 2 out of those places, you actually meet the real Africa. And that's why I'm passionate about it.
Hello, my name is Leonida Mutuku, and I'm an entrepreneur. I run IntelliPro, which is a big data company. Probably speaking about my passion, you can imagine, is in the data space, but more specifically, we're very interested in how to improve access to information. Done a lot of work in the open data space, and for me, what's critical about governments opening up their data is how do we provide agency to citizens, especially when they engage with their public institutions. And I think here's where data, information from data is very critical, and it's very important to find ways in which, I mean, not everyone, of course, is data literate, or everyone can get insights from a large data set. So how do we form intermediary interventions between all these open data sets that public institutions are making an effort to put out there, and ensure that the knowledge derived from that is very impactful, especially to majority of the mass population. So it's not just to the literate few, but everyone can find useful insights from this data and can use this as for evidence-based advocacy for citizen engagement. And so probably be speaking more around that space today.
Hi, my name is Melissa Densmore, and I run the Center in Information and Communications Technology for Development at the University of Cape Town, where I teach computer science and do a lot of research with colleagues like David Johnson here also. I have a lot of passions. One of the projects that we're working on right now is to develop community wireless for some townships in about 40 kilometers south of where UCT is. And these are townships that are high-density urban communities. David would call them peri-urban, but they're in the midst of urban and suburban communities. And so as much as we want to talk about rural, there are pockets of communities that are getting less data or slower access to infrastructure than others, even in the urban context. And so I think this can benefit them also. But we still don't know what applications they might have for what might be a more localized infrastructure. And the question I asked earlier was not how can we think less just about access to the internet that's out there, but how can they create an internet sort of in their own communities where they are feeling very productive and they're contributing, and they're able to not only contribute and communicate with one another, but become recognized for the individuality and the creativity of the stuff that's going on within their own communities. And so my angle on that is to take a co-design approach, not to come with the answer of these are the apps that you need, but to really go and ask the question, how would you envision using it? and to work with them to design applications and design the infrastructures and design the policies and business models to support it.
Okay, good afternoon. Where is Kashif? I wonder why he's thrown me into this. Okay, my name is Martin Obuya. I'm the president and chairman of the Internet Society, the Kenya chapter. What I'll talk about today is what the Internet Society is doing in terms of the community networks, and I'll also bring some insights from my experience from ITU, since I sit on 2 technical committees, in terms of the Universal Access Fund and how it can help the communities. I'll also talk about what Internet Society did. There was a workshop a month and a half ago in Rwanda, where we talk about internet for education and how internet can be used by everybody within the community. So that's what I'll bring this afternoon, and I hope you'll have an exciting discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Martin. Thanks, everyone. So with that, I'll just, sorry, it might be easier for me to use the mic instead. Can you hear me? So with that, just to kick off the discussion, now?
Yep.
Yes. Okay, just to kick off the discussion, I'll start with a couple of questions, and that'll spur them to give you lots of examples and ideas. And feel free to chime in and see if you want to ask questions. So the first one I have is, what should be done to enable community engagement? And any one of you that has ideas that you can speak of. You want to?
I think we should allow the black woman to start.
Whoever wants to.
I would say each community, if we respond to our community's needs, they will engage. And let me give you an example. Melissa has mentioned the research area that at UCT, Kailisha, which is 40 kilometers basically outside Cape Town, or on the other side of the airport, as we used to call it. I spent a year and a half in Kailisha doing the very fast, I always like saying that because Jonathan made me say that we did the very fast research on mobile primary users of the internet on their mobile fast means on their mobile phone. And they're not fancy smartphones as you have them now. It was the small Nokias with edge 2G connectivity. In order to see what they will do if they had access to the internet. Remember, they had access to the internet, they just didn't know this is the internet. And our engagement came in the form of the content that was being served to them. They were not accessing the internet because it was not useful to them. In their minds, the information that was on the internet did not respond to their need. So when we introduced a job matching platform, all of a sudden everybody wanted to be on the internet. And that changed even my own personal mentality on engagement. It's just about responding to needs and responding to the users and what they want. It's not about us sitting here in a fancy boardroom or meeting room and determining what they want. It's just going and sitting with them and understanding what they need. What are their user habits? I mean, we had these assumptions that them typing out on Google or typing out a URL was hard. It is hard, but they got a way around it. They learned how to bookmark some pages because they knew they had frequency of getting a job in those pages. So it's just about responding to very specific needs and understanding their user behaviors.
Probably to pick up on a few of the points Shiko has brought out. What really promotes community engagement? I think there's a concept in governance called closed user loops, feedback loops rather. And this means that it's not just top-down communication, but there's also reception of the feedback coming from the communities, and you can see a complete action point based on this feedback. I'll probably give an example from Shiko's rural area, Lanet, in Nakuru. And I found it very interesting how the community has been engaged around sustainable development goals, and how technology, of course, is powering this. So there's company called Open Institute that's been running a project there, and how they've been able to get the community moving and actually highly engaged is in their participation, in getting them to participate in data collection, in enumerating what their needs are, enumerating what their government needs to be aware of. And so they have been using low-resourced mobile phones. This is an app called Open Data Kit, which is available on a cheap smartphone, to collect data within the community. And these are the women within the community, the men within the community, actually collecting their own data around issues that the SDGs actually touch on, like access to water, health, poverty, nutrition. And this information, they aggregate and unpack together with these communities and are able to use those insights to engage their institutions, their public institutions. So this is the county government. And for me, I found a very fascinating outcome from this kind of active participation within the community when they found out that there was a need for a dispensary in an area, and in using that evidence that they had collected amongst themselves using the mobile phone, they were able to present this to the county government. And upon presenting their use case to the county government was like, oh, we've actually set aside money for a dispensary. So here the direct engagement was, where should we build this dispensary so that it has, majority effect. So if they didn't have access to information that they could use to push for what their community needed, I don't think the engagement would have been as fruitful as this particular use case showcases.
So I think I wanted to mention a project coming out of our center that also uses ODK. There's a fishing community in Western Cape. It's a project that's called the Abulobi Project, and basically the fishermen themselves are using ODK to collect information about their catches, and the next project is helping them to interpret that data, right? Because if they're seeing the text that's there, they can't translate that to what should I be fishing for today, or when should I go out and fish again. And I think there's something around what we were talking about earlier with open data, where just having the data is not enough. We have to have data presented in a way that is actually useful and interpretable and actionable by these communities. But I think there's a lot of examples of communities where they really have been able to use ODK to engage and participate, but there's just as many communities where they haven't been able to, in part because the content providers and the ISPs and the existing architectures and infrastructures of the internet actually disincentivize this community engagement and community participation from a price point of view or other things. And so I think you could frame the question of what can ISPs do to include the communities, but they don't want to, right? What can content providers do? And in general, it feels like, especially from like a digital rights management perspective, that they don't have incentive to have people access their media without connection to internet, where they can't count how many views, how many downloads there have been. And for as much Bluetooth and peer-to-peer sharing there is, the problem with Bluetooth and peer-to-peer sharing is there's no way for, let's say, a local artist to know how many people have listened to and downloaded and shared their new music, right? And so we have projects also in our center where we have developed apps to support hip-hop artists producing music on their own phones, right? But we need to take that further and allow them to participate.
Thank you. So we got a range of examples here. With that, I'll go to the next one, which is basically what are existing business models for rural development? And I think there were some. We also had some discussions around lunch. Like, what are some disruptive models that we've seen so far that have worked in community engagement? So you want to take a crack at it, Martin, because you threw some examples at us, and you didn't get a chance yet. That's the other part.
Fine, thank you. For me, just going back to the previous question, this is more of a challenge to the organizers, because if you look around, I don't know how many people are coming from the real communities. Is there anybody from the counties in this audience? Is there anybody out of Nairobi? How many do we have? Okay, fairly represented. It goes back to the definition of county, okay? The community rather. Because my approach would be what the ladies are saying is like, we need to first of all move away from designing the thing in the lab, go down to the citizen and find out what their exact needs are, instead of designing the prototype in the lab and trying to fix it at the community. So we need more community participation, and I expected more, probably, since we're talking about open community networks, I expected more people from the counties than from Nairobi to be part of the audience. Because if we keep having this kind of forums, it sounds good, it's scientific and everything, we're just pleasing ourselves. But are we talking to the real community, or are we just talking to somebody who is not well defined? So I'll give an example of what the Internet Society did. Just here in Kibera, there is a project called Tunaweza. So what we did, and we went down to Kibera. This was done by Wituki and his team, Kevin. These are part of the internet development team we have at Internet Society. So we went down, first of all, just to ask the people what's happening, what are you doing, how do you communicate, okay? What are some of the challenges? So Tunaweza is a very simple thing. We just started with a simple lab, just got a space in somebody's house, moved it to a school where we are able now to provide the bandwidth and understand what else you need to do with the internet, okay? And you find it keeps the young people busy. They ask a lot of questions. They cannot afford the internet. What needs to be done? Is there a way they can get simpler technology they can use? And okay, most of them now, if you look at the pricing of the smartphone and the feature phone, it's very thin. So you can get a smartphone for even less than 3,000 shillings. But we went down and asked the community and asked the young people, what do you want to use and how do you understand what is internet? So we broke it down. We had an open day. First of all, because when you talk about internet, we assume everybody's using internet. You'll be surprised. Like what you're saying, not everybody is far. Even just don't go far from Nairobi. Less than 10 kilometers, even the networks are following. We have the leading provider doing adverts. We are 4G covered, but as you drive along the highway, there's some places you realize it's not fully covered, okay? So we need to redesign our approach, think of who we're trying to target, and let's be practical in some of these things so to make it successful.
Anyone else have anything to add?
I mean, I think there's lots of examples of business models, right? Like prepaid vouchers has been an incredibly disruptive business model that's really worked, and I think it's what a lot of us consider trying in terms of creating sustainability. And earlier was presented advertising model, like give them free wireless and then let them advertise. What we see also often in rural communities, and it really depends on the community and the country and the context, but self-help groups and co-ops as means of having community-based leadership to run whatever that access may be. The model that's also very common is a donor-funded model. And that works really great for 3 years until the donor decides they don't want to pay for a VSAT connection anymore, right? Another model is using prepaid solar charging for the phones to pay for the communication, right? So I think there's a lot of models out there, and I think part of what we want to do is give people options.
In this line of business models and disruption, does anybody in the audience have a question for the panel? Anything specific that you want, that's local, you want addressed? We'll send one of the mics in the audience. I can give mine for now.
It's talk about community networks, and I don't know quite so much what's going on in the counties when we get further out, but certainly in a lot of the suburbs of Nairobi, Eastleigh, South C, South B, there's an awful lot of people just setting up their own service providers, and They get a line from somebody, from us, from Zuku, from Safaricom, whether it be 4G line or a fixed line, and they just set up their own community wireless hotspots, start running cabling all over the place. So obviously this may not be a legal thing to do, but there's nothing stopping guys from getting on with doing it. And if there's nothing stopping people, wireless people doing it, what can be done about making those businesses legitimate, putting them into a legal framework, because they're obviously operating currently illegally. So that's really the question, is how can those guys sort of get going, and how can they become legalized and become official?
Who wants to take this?
I mean, about the legal bit, there's this story going around in the Twitter sphere, the Kenyan one, about this guy, and it's pretty much what you're asking, about this guy who, you've heard about our fancy train. If you're not Kenyan, you should take it. It's called the Madaraka Express. It takes you through the Tsavo and stuff. So this guy, I think he was quite entrepreneurial. He decides, if you want to go to the train station to get the ticket, I'll buy it for you. You pay 200 shillings to do it. Is it illegal to do it? It should not be.
That's not illegal now. Doesn't that money saved by enough?
Yes, no. So what your guy has done, because we have that, in my estate I have that network before Safaricom came, and we could subscribe. What they've done is they've taken the pain away from me coming to you to try and get a line from you. And I just pay them for the trouble of maintaining and putting like a cooler server in their servants' quarter to be able to manage all the 20s or so people he's supporting in the area and in the next compound. So I would say he has a formal business because he has a till number that he's paid through, but I don't think it's illegal. In my definition, I don't think it's illegal.
Sorry, I think it brings up something that the tech community and the communication authority have been at us all over, and this is what does it mean to be a qualified technology provider? And I think here's where you have to consider what redress does the community have if they do not get satisfactory services from this provider. And so I think that's why it becomes really great to be a reseller on top of a licensed provider, especially if we don't have any training. So perhaps, probably a solution would be like, how do these ISPs or how do these communication providers get partners, local community partners who they train to meet their standards or certify them in one way or the other, and can enable them to run micro businesses on top of their platform. Because I think that's what's really missing from telcos here. It's like that fear of collaboration, that fear of letting go of that part of your business model when really it could empower community than if they had to interface with you directly.